On my what looks like a messy palette, I guess it is messy, that's okay. I have a combination of cadmium yellow mixed with phthalo blue green shade and then toned down with a little complementary cad red. Start the upbeat music. No, this is not a mistake. I turned my watercolor paper sideways. Why? So that I can get to the top areas of the foliage in front of the cottage without smearing the drawing, and down below so that I can better get at the areas where I want to paint. Later on, it will be vertical. So, what the hell am I doing here? I'm painting in such a way that I'm getting the basic background greenery in this cottage garden down on my watercolor paper. I've got this clip going a little faster now. So I'm using light to medium, darker values. And I'm doing it very loose, moving the brush back and forth, just to get the impression of a lot of that background plant greenery. Now I'm going in between the openings in the white fence. I'm going to call it the Tom Sawyer fence. So I'm using a range of values from light to dark, but I am not getting involved in any details whatsoever. The generalized impression, yes. Tiny little fussy details, no. And a good way to do this is to, if it's in real life or if it's from a reference photograph, like I'm working with, is squint. And I mean squint hard, really squint. And if you wear glasses, you can keep your glasses on. So what you see are just the basic color masses, and you don't get involved in lots of tiny details. So I'm setting up the foliage, and the details will come later. And even those I'm going to simplify. Now I'm working on a wet-on-wet background foliage behind the house. And I'm doing wet-on-wet, so it's going to have a very soft look to it. It's going to give it, by softening it like that, you get a little atmospheric perspective. Hey, you're painting uptown when you can get that atmospheric perspective. It's pretty cool. So this is all wet on wet. The foliage that I did was primarily wet on dry. But again, this is wet on wet. Okay, get ready for it. Atmospheric perspective. A lot more dramatic. When everything's not up front in your face, you get that illusion of going back into space. Okay, now we're vertical. What am I going to do next? More green foliage. And again, my foliage mixture is cad yellow or cad yellow light, either way. Phthalo blue, green shade. And to tone it down so it's not quite so garishly green in places, I add the complementary cadmium red to the green mixture. Now I'm adding a little bit of detail in the form of flower stems. Just a few. I'm not copying the photograph exactly, but I do want to get that illusion of some stems. It just adds an extra bit of interest and makes that foliage less blocky looking. It starts to give the foliage some identity. The identity, of course, we're looking at garden plant life. I continue here to get patches of basic greenery again, using light, middle, dark values. You can see how these dark values in between the slats and the fence are really starting to pull out that fence. The contrasting darker values bring out the negative shape of the fence. Here I'm using a dry brush technique and just kind of sliding it very quickly across the pathway stones. Gives it just a great foreground texture. This is a mixture of opera red with a little bit of cad yellow. Here I'm using my trusty water spritzer just to give areas of the foliage and the pathway a little bit of softness. That combination of hard and soft can really bring visual interest to a painting. Here I'm mixing some cobalt blue and some cool red opera to kind of get a lavender color. So the parts of the picket fence, the face that is not directly reflecting sunlight, in other words, the sides of the picket are just a little bit darker. So this gives each of those pickets, or slats, whatever you want to call them, 3 dimensions. Or, to say it in a more arty way, depth. D-E-P-T-H, depth. I am horrible with spelling, but I think I got that. Now we've got the Tom Sawyer fence popping from out of all that garden greenery. Speaking of greenery, now I'm putting some of green popping up between the spaces on each of those stones of the path. All of those channels of green really helps to define each and every individual stone. And I do hope, as you're watching me paint, you're counting up the number of stones that are emerging. I guess like me, I'm assuming that when you're going up a short flight of stairs, you're counting your steps. Okay, next I'll be doing all of those flowers, hundreds and hundreds of flowers. But guess what? Like the foliage, when you saw only a few stems painted, you're going to see me only paint a few flowers. And with that, they're only going to be the barest indication of flowers, like you're seeing here. Easy peasy. The flowers here in the foreground are getting just a little bit more detail in them, but not much. I'm keeping them very simple. I'm certainly not trying to copy my reference photograph. No way. I'm catching the impression, but not the exact reality. I do hope you're listening, because after this video, there is going to be a written test. Time to go over to the dark side with some really dark valued foliage, just to give more depth and more drama in the dense foliage growing around the cottage door and the cottage living room window. Hey, no individual leaves painted here, just shapes to give the impression of foliage, dark foliage. A few more flower indications around the doorway. My beautiful colored chalk markers. I use them as well to render more flowers. All chalk markers contain a gouache-like substance. And gouache is basically watercolor, except it's not as opaque. So perfect for the flowers on top of the foliage. Here I'm adding water because I want to do the foliage, continue with the foliage behind the house, and I want it nice and soft, so you can see I'm doing it wet on wet. Here's a question for you. Why am I doing this wet on wet? For, yes, atmospheric perspective. Don't you know that as I'm working on this painting from start to finish, I'm comparing my painting with that reference photograph. I'm not trying to copy the reference photograph, not by a long shot, but I want to make sure I'm capturing the general impression. So my head is going back and forth, back and forth. I'm painting, I'm looking at the painting, I'm comparing it to the reference photograph, I'm looking at the painting, I compare it to the reference photograph, I'm looking at the painting, well, you know what I mean. Very important. And as an artist, you need to get used to this, whether you're painting from life or whether you're painting from a photograph. Here I'm darkening some of the grass in between the stones, just to bring out the stones a bit more. Have you counted them yet? Time to render the door. The glass opening in the door, the arch in the door, and some of the flowers in the door, or hanging in front of the door. I think hanging in front of the door. There's something there. There is a doorknob, and I'm going to paint that too. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. You're not supposed to paint a lot of little details, but a door's got to have a doorknob. And not only that, I'm just going to do it with a blot or two. Okay, finally, here it comes. The doorknob. In slow motion. The final touch-ups on the cottage garden and little areas on the house. The next is going to be finishing with the roof. I'm mixing a puddle of cool color and some warm colors. A great view of the top of my bald head. I'm painting a cast shadow across the front door. It's not in the reference photograph, but I have renewed my artistic license. So that allows me to do this, and it makes the door a little more dramatic. Water spritzer softening. More bald head sightings. I could have edited out these bald head views, but I don't know, I think it gives the video a bit more passafazool. The roof has a lot of shingles, but I'm doing an impression. I'm not trying to copy reality. So you'll see, I put in a few shingles here and there, and it does the trick just fine. The shingles. Finally, the final touch-ups. I do hope that you enjoyed me painting this lovely scene, and I hope that you leave a comment and or also subscribe to keep me motivated. Muchas gracias, danke, sheshe, and merci beaucoup.